Hello, BookTube. I have yet another BookTube announcement that I want to make, another event that's coming up in March that's always been one of my favorites on BookTube, and that is March of the Mammoths, which is being put on by Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse, and also Alex at Big Al Books. And I'll leave a link to Jason's announcement video with his stuffed mammoth on his shoulder, where he talks about the value of reading mammoths. The March of the Mammoths is an event dedicated to reading books over 800 pages. With the subtext being that you probably have a couple of those books that have been staring at you, guilt-inducingly for years on your shelves, thinking, now's not the time, or, oh, I'm not up for that kind of commitment. In his announcement video, Jason, as usual, is a deep thinker on BookTube, and as usual, he points out makes a wonderful observation about this, which is that some books need that time. They need that time to unfold. They need time to do the multivalenced nuance that they are capable of doing if you will commit to living inside them for a long time. That's absolutely true. Not all mammoths, not all 800-page books or more can say that. A lot of them, the author is simply wasting your time. But the ones that are effectively using that length are doing it in a way that, again, there's not a competition, no invidious implications meant here, but they're doing it in a way that a shorter work cannot. Plain and simple. You won't find a bigger fan than yours truly of Chekhov or Guy de Maupassant or Eudora Welty. The artistry involved in shaping an entire world into a short story is amazing. Absolutely amazing. I should know because most of my favorite writers in that particular form of fiction are Irish. The Irish do it beautifully, beautifully well, including, maddeningly, the 24 great Irish short story writers who, as far as I know, have never been translated into English. But that's true at the other end of the spectrum as well. You can also do something totally unique to that mammoth size that no other size or heft of a fiction work can do. That's absolutely true. For me, of course, as I've said every year on March of the Mammoths, there's also an extra element involved, an extra attraction for mammoths, which is that I read really fast. I am a very fast reader. And I read a lot. I devote a lot of time. I devote a lot of time to reading every day, every night, every week, without fail. It's my whole life. It's my profession and my avocation, which means you put those two things together, and I am burning my way through a book. Now, I am not meaning to disparage that experience. I love it. I don't think I need to convince you that I am enthusiastic about reading. If you're watching this channel, I think that's the one thing, even if you don't like me, that's the one thing you would agree on. But there's an element to reading that slower readers experience more often than I do, a lot more often. And that is the feeling of being lost in a book, that classic phrase, being lost in a book. I don't typically get that because I'm simply not reading the book long enough to get lost in it. So that's simply not happening. Every once in a while, somebody will write a novel that's not long that can still lose me. I can still get lost. I can still have that feeling. An older version would be The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsany. And a newer version would be The Vore by Catling, where I did feel like I was lost in a novel most of the time, not upper middle class Connecticut divorce. Somebody says something really pointed and acidic around the pool in chapter 14. Nothing happens before then. Precious little happens after it. I'm not going to get lost in that book. I'm going to be over with it. I'm going to be out of the book before I can have the time to get lost in it, even if it had the multiplicity for me to do that. But with Mammoths, it's a time commitment, even for me. It takes me, usually a Mammoth, a book over 800 pages, usually takes me a stretch of a weekend to do. I can't read them in one sitting, which is what I do for most of the books that I read. 95% of the books that I read in one sitting. I can't do that with a Mammoth. And so they give me a chance to feel what the rest of you feel far more often than I do, which is that feeling of being lost in a book, of having a vast expanse of pages behind you and a vast expanse of pages in front of you, which can be wonderful unless the book is punishing you. But we'll hope that that's not true. And I want to show you. I mean, it's as Jason points out, if you even start a Mammoth for March, then you are participating and more than welcome. There is no expectation here that you need to finish a mammoth or more than one mammoth in March. There's no expectation of that at all. One of the most charming aspects of March of the Mammoths has always been that it's founding genius and it's the anchor, its host, Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse, is a slow, meticulous, attentive, absorptive reader. So he almost never, it's almost a guarantee that he's not going to get through whatever mammoth he starts. And yet he makes this event. Anyway, I think that's just wonderful because it isn't just him just saying that you don't have to do some sort of booktube performance to be part of this event. It's him demonstrating it himself. He's almost certainly not going to finish the mammoth that he starts for the month. So the pressure is off. That is the best way to demonstrate it. This is not a contest. I myself read much, much faster. So I'm making a provisional TBR. Usually when it comes to March of the Mammoths, I like to leave an element of serendipity. I never know what really big book I'm going to encounter that I didn't expect that I would encounter. But nevertheless, there are 4 mammoths that are coming out in the month of March that I'm going to read just as a matter of course. I read new releases in the American book market. I don't care how big or small they are. If they're in my wheelhouse, then I read them. And there are at least 4 of those. Now, the month is bound to turn up more. And used bookstores are bound to turn up more. But I'm at least going to do these, and oddly enough, maybe I'll really appreciate this, all 4 of them are rereads of a kind. I've read all 4 of them before in one way or another. I want to show them to you, the 4 that I'm going to do. The first one is Divine Days by Leon Forrest. I am utterly amazed that an author decided to reprint this. It's like 1,300 pages long. It's a big, phantasmagorical, everything but the kitchen sink novel. It centers around one main character who is both a writer and knows writers and works for writers. But this author very clearly wants to pull in the ultimate Canterbury Tales of thousands of voices. It's not the time. I read this when it first came out from a library. I don't think I ever even saw it in a bookstore. And I was blown away. I thought it was really, really good. But I think even back then, I was thinking, no one is ever going to reprint this. I'm never going to see this in a bookstore. No way. I'm never going to do it. And somebody did, in a very pretty, big telephone book-sized hardcover. So this is a major undertaking, and I am 100% sure that I missed a lot. I read this in installments at a library. So that's a far cry from sitting down with a brick of a book. I'm sure that I missed a lot. Cannot wait. I am so happy that this has been reprinted. I always say, that I never know what to expect in my job. I never know what to expect is going to come out new in any book season, and that very much includes old things. I read lots and lots of new releases, but a lot of those are new works in translation and reprints. And that means that the publishing world is free to surprise me in any number of ways. I'm really kind of hoping that in March this book gets some critical coverage. I'm hoping that some of my fellow reviewers review it. That's a tall request. A lot of my fellow reviewers, well, I won't say they're wimps when it comes to reading. I'll say they have lots of commitments. That is certainly true, and that's also diplomatic. They tend to shy away from books this big, but I'm hoping that they don't. So that's one of the mammoths that I'll be rereading in March. But for that one, it's going to feel like a first-time read, I'm sure. I'm sure that it is. I remember some amazing set pieces. There's one in particular that I'm wondering how many critics will read this thing and think, oh my, I'm really glad I stuck it out to get to that set piece. But this next one, it's a big hardcover anthology of comic book reprints from Marvel Comics. If it comes out on time, I think I have a contact of a contact of a contact who is going to get me a copy. I don't know that I would pay $100 for this at my local comic shop, but I will definitely take a copy in the mail. This is a big hardcover anthology of Nova, which was a 1970s Marvel comic thing. A teenager named Richard Rider. Note the alliteration. Peter Parker, Reed Richards, Richard Rider. He's a normal teenager. Stan Lee had a heavy hand in Nova, and it was really the last Marvel creation that he had a really heavy hand in. He sort of stumbles across an alien uniform. That uniform. The helmet and the full body costume. And when he wears it, he has superpowers. He can fly really fast, hence the signature energy trail that blurs out his legs. He has marginal super strength. The helmet is a visor comes down so that it is equipped for space travel. A few other things, very nondescript. That this looks like just a little kid coming up with a very boring idea of a generic superhero, and that's just what this was. That's exactly what this was. It had some interesting Sal Buscema artwork at first. Most of the art chores went to a very obviously bored Carmine Infantino, and it went through the usual things. Nova has to meet Spider-Man. He has to fight Thor, a mind-controlled Thor. He has to gradually learn about his origin issue by issue. He has to have teenage angst at high school. And I was decidedly unimpressed with Nova while I was reading these issues, and I'm wondering if I get this hardcover. It's like 900 pages long. It counts for March of the Mammoths, and it counts as a reread. I'm wondering what I will see in this that I maybe missed the first time. I don't think there is anything. I remember thinking, now in the 23rd century, Nova would be a woman, a minority, and ridiculously overpowered. So the de rigueur fight with Thor would be one where she or they or whatever you're going to call them mops the floor with him in one punch. That would absolutely happen, and if a creator wrote that any other way, the creator would be fired and never work in the industry again. But this was in a less predictable era, a less racist era, when you could have a character who was just sort of an ordinary superhero. That's what Nova is. He's a very ordinary superhero. He doesn't have any interesting powers. He doesn't have a very interesting origin story. He doesn't have a very interesting character. He's just a kind of a generic superhero. Fly, a little bit of superpowers, that sort of thing. As is evidenced in his fight with Thor, which I haven't read in 50 years. I haven't read it since I read the individual issue. It had a Jack Kirby cover, which attracted me on the newsstand. But in that issue, if I remember correctly, Nova encounters a mind-controlled Thor. And just as the mind control of Thor is wearing off and he started to say, "What?" Just as that is happening, Nova decides, we read his thoughts in the thought bubbles. He decides, the only way I'm going to take this guy out is if I put everything I've got into one massive punch. And just as Thor is waking up, Nova clocks him with a massive punch, and it hurls him across a parking lot against a stone wall. And Thor is standing there going, just give me a minute until I clear my head. He doesn't even have a bruise. I thought that was kind of funny. That pretty much put Nova in perspective. All right, you are a third-rate superhero. You're all you had in one punch to a completely defenseless Thor. Didn't even give him a black and blue mark. It was merely an inconvenience until he regained control of his senses. But there might be later on in these issues. This book is big. It will collect a lot of Nova that I'm sure I haven't read. I gave up on Nova after like 10 or 11 issues. About a year, so 12 issues, something like that. There'll probably be a lot of stuff in here that's very cosmic, that deals with the Nova core, the way the writers expanded the lore, that I haven't seen. And who knows what else. Marvel tends to be generous with these 100-page omnibus editions, so they might put in a lot of other stuff too that I don't know. So I will give it a try. If I can get a copy, I will give it a try. Then this next one I have praised on this channel already. I have already read it. This is definitely a reread. I read it in 2022. It intrigued me so much that it was one of only 3 books from 2023 that I read in 2022. I'm very much looking forward to a reread of the finished copy in March. This is by Karl Schlogel, and it is The Soviet Century, the archaeology of a lost world. Big thing, 900 pages about the lost Soviet world. Not just the big posturing on the world stage in terms of politics and, Gorbachev and Reagan and whatnot, but the whole experience of living in the Soviet world. I thought this book was incredible. Just amazingly, amazingly good. I lived through almost the whole of the Soviet Union's existence, and when it collapsed, like many people who had been watching it for a long time, I didn't think it ever would. I thought it was a permanent thing on the world stage. So it was impossible to avoid when Gorbachev came to power and started talking like no other head of state had ever talked in literally the history of the world. Drastically understated, even by historians today. It was easy to see that you were living through something genuinely historical, and like the COVID-19 pandemic or something like that. And this book captures that wonderfully, absolutely wonderfully. It goes deep into the details. And I'm going to give this a thorough reread when I get the immense finished copy. So this is definitely a reread, but I'm going to get a lot more out of it. And the same thing with this one. This is also a reread. I read this when it was first translated in English, and I've talked about it on this channel a bit. It is huge. It is from the New York Review of Books. It is fascinating. It is coming out in March. It is an indigenous March Mammoth. This is The Story of a Life by Konstantin Postovsky. This is translated by a guy named Smith. And it'll be a New York Review of Books paperback. I think it's a paperback from them. The copy I have is a paperback. And it's a gigantic, sprawling memoir of a Russian who went through it all. The revolutions, World War I, doorstep of World War II, all sorts of social programs. Here you get the personal I pronoun version of the Soviet world. And just I read an old beat up hardcover of this. I'm not sure if it was the same translation. I think this might be a new translation. I'll have to check on that before I attempt to write about it. But I was amazed by it even when I first read it. I'm very happy to see it get reprinted, just like the Leon Forest. I'm very happy that the reprint culture in this country is not timid. That's very good. This is a major undertaking to ask of readers. And the people at NYRB know that, and they did it anyway. So that's the fourth of the Mammoths that I will be doing for March of the Mammoths. So those are 4 indigenous Mammoths. Those are 800-page or more books that are coming out in March. So they fall right in my wheelhouse of reading new releases. And I'm curious to know, of course, if you are going to sign up. March of the Mammoths is not a lightweight booktube event. It's a major thing. Jason's example notwithstanding, I think a lot of people are viewing that one, it's not at all a requirement. But I think a lot of people think, well, if I'm going to do March of the Mammoths right, I should start and finish the Mammoth in March. And that's a big ask for the reading schedule of a lot of normal people. So curious to know if you're going to try it. Do you have a history with March Mystery Madness? Not March Mystery Madness. That's another March event. But March of the Mammoths, do you have a history with it? Have you had success with it? I'd love to know. Feel free to tell me. I will certainly be participating. These 4 are rereads. I'd be willing to bet in the course of March I will encounter Mammoths that aren't rereads. And I will add them to the mix. I can get a lot of Mammoths done in a month. But anyway, just an announcement video. I'll leave a link to Jason's video down below, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.